Buried in the remote redwood forests of Northern California lies a prison unlike any other. A place built not just to hold criminals, but to control and break the most violent men in America. Inside these walls, gangs are born, riots erupt, and silence is used as a weapon. This is Pelican Bay State Prison, California's most feared supermax facility. But what really happens behind those cold steel doors? Today, we pull back the curtain on one of the darkest corners of the US prison system. The birth of Pelican Bay. When most people hear the name Pelican Bay, they imagine danger, control, and fear. And they're not wrong. Located in Crescent City, California, just 13 miles from the Oregon border, Pelican Bay State Prison is one of the most notorious prisons in the United States. It opened in 1989, a time when California was drowning in gang wars, drug epidemics, and violent crime. Traditional prisons were overwhelmed. Inmates were running drug empires from inside, prison gangs controlled entire yards, and violence was spilling over into the streets. The California Department of Corrections needed something extreme, something that could isolate the most dangerous men in the system. The solution? Pelican Bay State Prison, a facility specifically designed for control. The prison was split into two main sections: the general population yard, which housed thousands of inmates in a more traditional maximum security setting, and then there was the infamous security housing unit, known simply as the SHU. The SHU wasn't just another cell block. It was a concrete labyrinth built for sensory deprivation and long-term isolation. The SHU cells were small, about 8 by 10 feet. Inside was a concrete slab for a bed, a toilet sink combo, and little else. The doors were solid steel with tiny slots. The windows, if you could call them that, were narrow slits angled to show nothing but the sky. No human contact. No yard time with other inmates. Just 22 to 24 hours a day in near total solitude. Even recreation happened in what inmates called a dog run, a small concrete pen with high walls and a grated ceiling where you could see only a sliver of the outside world. Why so extreme? Because Pelican Bay's SHU was built to house the worst of the worst: gang leaders, contract killers, and men who could order murders with a simple nod. In fact, from its earliest days, the SHU became infamous as the command center for some of America's most violent prison gangs. At Pelican Bay, 4 major gangs dominated. The Aryan Brotherhood, AB, a white supremacist group known for its ruthless violence and strong ties to organized crime. The Mexican Mafia, La M, one of the most powerful prison gangs in US history, with deep connections to cartels and street gangs. Nuestra Familia, NF, a rival Latino gang born out of blood feuds with La M. The Black Guerrilla Family, BGF, a politically motivated gang founded in the 1960s, mixing ideology with organized crime. These 4 groups were, and still are, locked in constant battles for power, territory, and influence. Pelican Bay's SHU was designed to cut off their leadership, to isolate shot callers so they couldn't send orders to soldiers on the main line or the streets. But here's the paradox. Instead of killing the gangs, Pelican Bay became their nerve center. Even from isolation, leaders found ways to communicate, through coded letters, smuggled notes known as kites, and even legal paperwork. Guards intercepted messages hidden in food trays, laundry, or written in invisible ink. Despite the walls, the gangs adapted. One former warden described Pelican Bay as a battle of control. The prison tried to silence the gangs, but the gangs evolved, turning the SHU into their corporate headquarters. The result? Some of the deadliest gang-related murders in California's history were orchestrated from behind the walls of Pelican Bay. But the SHU wasn't just feared by gang leaders. It became a symbol of psychological torment. Inmates who spent years, sometimes decades, inside reported hallucinations, paranoia, and severe mental decline. One prisoner said, "The SHU doesn't just lock up your body, it locks up your mind." Over the years, Pelican Bay became ground zero for debates about human rights. Was the SHU necessary to control violence, or was it state-sanctioned torture? By the 1990s and early 2000s, lawsuits piled up. Activists called for reform. But for correctional officers and the state, the SHU was essential. Without it, they argued, California's prison system would collapse under gang warfare. Pelican Bay wasn't just a prison, it was an experiment, a test of how far America was willing to go to control violence. And for decades, it has stood as both a fortress of order and a symbol of controversy. As we move deeper, we'll uncover the reality of life inside these walls, the gang wars, the riots, the hunger strikes that shook the prison system, and the chilling stories of inmates who lived and died inside Pelican Bay. Life inside the SHU, isolation, control, and survival. If the general population yard of Pelican Bay is dangerous, then the SHU, Security Housing Unit, is its dark heart. For decades, this wing has defined the prison's reputation. Step inside, and you enter a world of endless silence, strict routines, and psychological warfare. The daily schedule for an inmate in the SHU is brutally monotonous. The cell is your universe. You wake up on a concrete slab with a thin mattress, under fluorescent lights that never truly turn off. Breakfast arrives through a slot in the steel door, usually a cold tray of cereal, milk, and bread. Guards slide it through without words. Interaction is rare, and when it happens, it's business only. For 22 to 24 hours a day, prisoners remain in that tiny 8 by 10-foot box. Reading materials are limited, sometimes only legal documents or a Bible. Televisions and radios are privileges rarely granted. Human voices are scarce, muffled sounds from neighboring cells or the echo of a guard's boots in the hallway. When recreation time comes, it isn't freedom. Inmates are shackled at wrists and ankles, escorted down long, echoing corridors to a small concrete pen. Some call it the dog run because it feels more like a kennel than a yard. It's open to the sky, but only a slice. For 1 hour, you can pace in circles, do push-ups on the floor, or stare upward at the strip of clouds before being led back to isolation. Meals are the same every day, served cold, bland, and small. Medical visits are minimal. Showers are limited, usually twice a week, and even then, the inmate is locked inside a small cage with a shower head. It's control stacked upon control, a routine designed to break the spirit. And yet, despite these restrictions, survival inside the SHU is about more than physical endurance. It's about mental warfare. Inmates develop routines to keep their minds sharp, push-ups, meditation, writing letters. Others spiral into hallucinations, paranoia, or rage. Reports from former inmates describe men screaming into the void, beating on doors, or talking to themselves endlessly. But perhaps the most astonishing truth is this: even in isolation, gangs still thrive. The SHU was designed to cut leaders off from their soldiers, but many continue to operate like generals in exile. Using coded letters, smuggled notes, and even communication through air vents, orders were sent out. A single word could mean life or death for someone on the main line, or even on the streets outside the prison. For guards, this reality meant constant vigilance. Every slip of paper, every scrap of writing, every phone call from the law library had to be monitored. One missed detail could mean a hit ordered, a stabbing on the yard, or even violence outside prison walls. In Pelican Bay, the SHU wasn't just containment. It was a chessboard where every move mattered. But over time, the SHU became a lightning rod for controversy. Human rights groups condemned the conditions as cruel and unusual punishment. Psychologists warned of long-term damage. Studies showed inmates who spent years in isolation developed higher rates of anxiety, depression, self-harm, and even suicide. By the late 2000s and early 2010s, resistance began to grow, not just from activists, but from the inmates themselves. In 2011, and again in 2013, Pelican Bay became the epicenter of some of the largest prison hunger strikes in US history. At one point, over 30,000 inmates across California prisons joined in solidarity, refusing meals to protest indefinite solitary confinement. Their demands were simple: end the practice of locking men away for decades without meaningful human contact. The hunger strikes forced California to respond. Lawsuits followed, and eventually in 2015, a landmark settlement reshaped Pelican Bay's use of the SHU. Thousands of inmates who had been in isolation, some for over 20 years, were released back into the general population or transferred elsewhere. But make no mistake, Pelican Bay remains a fortress. The SHU still exists, though its population has been reduced, and the gangs that once ruled from within its walls continue to exert influence across California and beyond. For those who lived it, Pelican Bay's SHU is unforgettable. One former inmate described it as a place where time stops. You don't live, you just exist. Another said, the silence gets into your bones. After a while, you don't know if you're still human. Pelican Bay was meant to be the ultimate weapon against violence. Instead, it became a symbol of America's toughest and most controversial approach to incarceration. Pelican Bay State Prison stands as both a fortress and a warning. Built to control the most dangerous men in California, it became a crucible of human endurance and a battlefield for justice. Inside the SHU, lives were broken, minds unraveled, and gangs adapted in ways no one predicted. To some, Pelican Bay is proof that extreme measures are necessary to protect society. To others, it is the very definition of cruelty, a scar on the American prison system. One question remains: when punishment turns into isolation without end, do we lose part of our humanity in the process?